Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Hey everyone, this is mev-boost community call number 5. It's been a little while since we had the last one, but yeah, hopefully there have been some pretty exciting updates for Deneb and the upcoming hard fork there. So I have an agenda that I've assembled. I dropped it in the chat, and yeah, I think we can go ahead and get started. The main thing I want to do with this call today is just get everyone on the same page with Deneb. There's a hard fork coming up very soon. And, a key part of that will be updating mev-boost, all of the relays, and any builders who are listening. So, yeah, mainly I just want to call out some things and get us all on the same page there. We can discuss implementation and any testing efforts that we want to. And yeah, there's a few other things I put on the agenda just to call out. Otherwise, if there's other stuff people want to talk about, if there's time at the end, then we can move to more of an open discussion. So to get started, we'll start with spec updates. So the first one is on the builder specs. These are mainly in place for Deneb already. There was this one RFC to consider changing this constant. It's not super material, but in the sense that it'll probably even be the same number in the actual code. But that being said, this is more about parity with the consensus specs, which I think is pretty important. I'm just coming back from a break, so I haven't had time to look at this in much more depth beyond that, but I do want to call it out. So yeah, thanks, Chris. It's this 187 that he dropped in the chat. And yeah, if you're interested, please take a look. And yeah, so there's that. There are a few things on the relay specs, so we can move to those. These are the relay specs that FlashBots has, and the idea is that if you're like a nice conformant relay, you should implement these specs. Like a cool thing you get right is supporting this data API, which people use all over the place for all sorts of visualizations. So I think it's actually been quite helpful. There were a few things. I'll get to this a bit later, but I was working on some builder software and I was trying to go off the specs to implement various pieces and ran into some things that didn't quite match, at least the FlashBots implementation. So we worked on some of those. So there's this one here, number 26. This was just when you actually submit a block as a builder. Before I had basically said you get back some like signed receipt. I don't think any relay does this right now. And yeah, it doesn't really seem needed. You're welcome, Chris. But yeah, this PR just updates it to the 200 response code that matches implementation today. So that was pretty cool. And then there's another one around, this might have even just been something with like the API docs, but there was issue 24. There was just a field missing around the proposer public key. Yeah, Chris, did you want to say something? Your hand was up.
Oh, I just wanted to note that historically for the first issue, the block submissions only returning 200. It was when we designed the relay APIs. We thought it would be nice to return a signed receipt for builders to attribute like misbehavior. But then we didn't get around to implementing it before the merge, and there was never any appetite or ask for it. So it never got done. And this is just like an historical artifact from the design period. And I think it's all right to, yeah, thanks for splitting this out. And it seems that just returning 200 is good enough for now.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, no one's really complained, and it doesn't seem where I don't feel like we're in a place yet where there's like, these like semi-anonymous relays where like they could do more dangerous things. So not that we always want to be in this regime where this system's very like reputation based, but for now, it doesn't seem like we necessarily need these like super accountable responses, and we can always add it down the line. Let's see. So yeah, just some spec things. I think that was everything there. And okay, next up, I did want to chat about implementation readiness for Deneb. So I at least definitely want to call out the core FlashBot software we have. So that's mev-boost, mev-boost relay, and the FlashBots builder. Chris, or I don't know if Sarah's here, but if one of you would like to give like just a short update if possible. Otherwise, I can just call out
Sure.
notes. Okay.
Not sure. I don't think Sarah made it, but you can find the tracking issues for both mev-boost, the relay, and the builder linked in the community call agenda. This outlines like all the pieces that were needed. It's all mostly wrapped up on mev-boost and the relay. We have the final pieces as last PRs open for review and testing. Anyone with expertise in relays is welcome to take a look there too. And it would be appreciated to get a bit of more feedback and input if you would have any. On the builder side, until just recently, we were not able to work with Gav because of some missing functionality. And that's been, I think, implemented now. And we are starting to rebase the builder and then get that piece done too. I think the question here for us is, when do we participate in the DevNet? And it may be next week or 2 weeks later because of vacations in between. The goal is to wrap up all the code changes until next week. And then it's basically untested in like testnet. So the next stage here is then proper testing in live networks.
Cool. Very exciting.
That's a
so yeah, yeah, thanks. I dropped the tracking issues in the chat for mev-boost and the relay. So basically, I see your names here on the call. Like, most of you should go review these PRs. That would be very helpful. And yeah, Perry, that'd be great if you want to chat about testing.
Yeah, I can go about testing. So yeah, we would definitely love to have you guys on the testnets already, but I wanna showcase this one tool from Kurtosis, and I think Gyani is on here also with the video. So the reason I wanted to showcase is at the bottom, you can see a mock MEV example. I'll be updating this to also show a full MEV example. So there's 2 modes. The first mode will spin up Mario's mock MEV relay endpoint, and that would allow the client teams to test the builder workflow with a mock relay. And the mock relay also has the ability to generate invalid payloads, etc. So you can assert that valid payloads get delivered as well as invalid payloads get rejected. On the other side, you can have MEV type full, and the Kurtosis team has essentially got the entire builder relay infrastructure. It'll also use MEV flood to generate transaction load so that you can actually have the builder build blocks that would be valid. And the idea is that once the first half is working, the second half can use that to test their the entire relay builder update workflow. And the best case scenario, at least the way I'm approaching it, is all of this is local. So it would be perfect to have this working locally before we hit DevNets. If you guys prefer to still take part in DevNets, that's fine by me. But we found that this local testing approach has been really beneficial for DevNet 8 because you can just do way faster iterations. And Gyani, in case you want to add something.
Just wanted to give a real high-level shout-out here. It's amazing. That's invaluable to be able to start testing this in a more localized but holistic fashion. Yeah, great job.
Yeah, huge shout-out to Gyani and the Kurtosis team. I just let Gyani say something or add something if he wants to.
Yeah, thank you so much. And people can start using it. This is the H2 package, and if you, as Pari said, if you pass in the right parameter, you'll have your own testnet. And if you want to scale it up, you can run the same thing against Kubernetes as well if you wanted to. You have to wait for 4 epochs to see payloads getting delivered on the network.
And also just a point to mention, we've just used the Flashbots, mev-boost, relay, etc. as defaults. It's a completely overridable default in case someone wants to test any other relay or any other builder or anything else. So it's a generic piece of infrastructure.
Yeah, this is awesome. I would, this might be a longer term project, but at some point it would be nice to have something that looks kind of like Hive, and we get all of the relays into this sort of framework, and then we could actually test them in this way. So this is like a huge foundational piece. So really good to see that.
There's a really nice fun fact with Kurtosis. There's also a Go SDK built in. So you can actually have Go tests, and that's not the same as Hive, but it's kind of mostly there. So you can have a testnet spin up in the background, have Go tests assert a pre-state and a post-state.
Sweet. And there is the one caveat, I think, did we say 4 epochs until it'll basically, there are blocks flowing through it?
Yes. So after the first epoch, the mev flood component will start running, and the mev components will be spun up because it waits for Capella. And then after the 4th epoch, you should see payloads being delivered to the mev relay.
Okay, so it's not so much the mev software; it's more like fork timings and things that put these delays in place.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
gotcha.
all the CLs don't have support for Capella at Genesis yet. We're testing it, and once that's clean, then we'll be switching over, and you'll save an epoch at least. But there is a tiny hack here as well. You can change the slot time, so you can put slot times as 6 seconds instead of 12 seconds, and still make it faster.
Oh, nice. Okay, cool. Have you tried? This is an aside, but have you tried dropping the slot times really short?
We normally did 3 second slot times to just test stuff out, but you are hitting limits for sure because it's the main net spec in the end.
Right. Cool. Yeah, excellent. Thanks for sharing. I'll add these links to the agenda. And I was even just talking to some people like yesterday about testing relays and stuff. And yeah, I think this will be really helpful to a lot of people. So again, excellent work.
Yeah.
Chris, did
Absolutely.
you want to say something?
One question. Yes. How much of a 484 like data types and flows is already testable in this kurtosis setup?
I don't know if Mario doesn't look to be on this call, but I had a call with him, or we spoke about it to get the mock MEV stuff up and running ASAP. The types have already been updated yesterday, and I think he needs to integrate it into the mock MEV middleware software, whatever that we're using. And the aim is to have that done sometime next week. And then all client teams can ensure that it works with the mocks.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that'll be really helpful because it's essentially unit tests for these different pieces. And there's probably going to be a round of bug fixing just for those things. Then we can move to more full-fledged integration environments as we get closer to mainnet. Okay, so back to implementation. Let me just see where we're at in the agenda here. We covered most of this stuff about dev readiness. So great work, everyone. I did want to call out the other relay implementations. I know that we have Block Native with Dreamboat. I believe Blocks Route has an implementation. I at least see some of those representatives from those teams here. So just FYI, this is also something that your teams need to be aware of, is that the hard fork's happening. So definitely stay on top of this stuff and don't delay. I don't know if either of you want to give short updates on progress, and if you haven't looked at this yet, that's also fine. But this is a chance if you'd want to chat about anything.
Come on, like Uri, for instance, like what's the status of your 484 efforts? Like you're looking into it, right? I mean, are you playing with it? Are you researching it? Are you just waiting for it more? What's the status?
The reason I'm not giving an update is because I've been busy with other stuff, and Eyal is leading that with the dev team. So the reason I'm not giving an update is not because I'm withholding the information. Rather, I know we're working on it, but I really don't know the details because I've been working on multiple different initiatives. So I can tell you for sure we are working on it. I don't have you the specifics because I'm not leading the charge on it.
Yeah, I'm not trying to put anyone on the spot. I was just, if anything, I just wanted to call it out just to make sure that everyone's on the same page. And again, understand if people are just getting up around to things now.
I think I can repeat what Uri just said. That we are also looking at many different initiatives, and like I was able to actually browse the PRs that you've prepared, but I haven't got any big contribution. That's like I agree or disagree with something. Like, you know, we will be bringing those changes to Dreamboat as well, definitely. But like, you know, nothing particular, no particular notes for this particular implementation that you've done in the mev-boost relay so far.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll just say I will be knocking on your doors as we get closer to like bigger test nets like Sepolia Goerli, especially mainnet, to the extent that we can like help test these relays and the interactions with mev-boost and, you know, with clients. I think that'd be super valuable both for your teams, but also for everyone using your relays. So yeah, just keep it in mind. Again, that was kind of why I wanted to have this call, was just to like get this on everyone's radar so that we can all move forward together. So I think that is good for Janab. And yeah, so I did want to call this out. I was working on some builder software. So I've been talking with like the rest devs, and we've essentially have this project to have like a nice open source builder. There's like the Flashbots builder. There might be other builder projects, but I'm not aware of an open source one other than the Flashbots one. And the idea here is just to increase essentially implementation diversity and just have like, you know, in the long run, a very nice high quality implementation. I just started with this last week or so, and it's still kind of in a draft PR, but I was able to land blocks on Sepolia, which was fun. And yeah, just going to call it out, especially if anyone's listening, if there's any Rust devs out in the audience and you want to contribute, please reach out. And I think it'd be really good to have this effort here to have like a really nice open source builder. Yeah, so just wanted to call it out. And what else? Okay, so from here, I had some like, I said open questions or proposals. There's some things I've been thinking about doing. Some of them we've talked about on the call before at various times. And yeah, I guess, how do we want to do this? I guess before we jump into that part of the call, I see Justin and Mike are here. Are there any like optimistic relay updates worth giving? Just want to check in on that.
Not too much, I would say. We've been doing a few small refactors on the Flashbots handle submit new block handler, because the V2 version reuses a lot of that code, but since it's running in a different code path, like refactoring some of those functions out so they can be used both in both places makes them more testable and just like more modular. So that's very much like small code PR cleanup stuff, code health cleanup. Other than that, I think nothing too major to update, honestly.
Cool.
I guess one big development has been that Agnostic has turned on optimistic relaying. I haven't talked to the team recently, but if anyone here from Agnostic wants to talk about their experience, that'd be good. Otherwise, I guess we can talk about it offline.
Yeah, I'm not sure if anyone from Agnostic is here. But yeah, that's exciting, and definitely the more that we could build sort of, you know, let's say community knowledge around operating in optimistic mode, I think that'd be super helpful for people.
I mean, one thing I guess worth noting is that there was a bug in the Prism client, which meant that the requested gas limit was incorrectly set to 0 or something. And this was creating all sorts of false positives for the optimistic relaying, whereby the relay thought the block was invalid, and so we demoted the builders. And so I think we kind of implemented a hot patch for that, and we're kind of waiting for all these buggy Prism clients to to upgrade before removing the hot patch.
Yeah, that was
Okay,
weird because
good to know.
that one was a little weird because the validator registrations basically said set the gas limit to 0. And then builders were still sending blocks with like 30 million gas limit. So the blocks were still valid and we're still landing on chain, but because they were in optimistic mode, we processed them async and then thought that they would have failed. But yeah, it ended up not causing any missed slots, but it caused a lot of noise on the relay end, I guess.
Right. I mean, yeah, that's an interesting question. Is like, this is almost certainly a bug with, you know, preparing these registrations. And the question is, do we just ignore it? Even though it's deviating from the spec
it kind of
technically?
implies that the builders aren't actually looking at the gas limit that's set. Like, does anyone actually, do any validators actually set like a lower, like a 25 million gas limit, and then do the builders actually respect that? Like, has anyone actually looked at that data?
Yeah,
I mean,
I did a little
relays-
bit when we had this issue, and they do to some extent. I talked to some builders as well, and I think they mentioned that some of them, at least, they look at the biggest relay and ask those relays for their registrations, and we'll use those gas limits to set it. And then there were differences between relays as well in what they reported for these validators. So definitely some builders are looking at it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that relays validate this as well, right? So, I mean, that was where the issue came up. So even if builders aren't, it should still be respected.
So my question is, should we like broadcast this to the wider community of validators? Because like we are still getting those errors, and like we haven't, like, you know, some clients apparently are not re-registering with us every time, and we have some failures from like, you know, the blocks not really passing through that through our validation because the block, the gas amount is wrong. So shouldn't we just inform that, like, more broadly, that hey, look at your present node code bases, because like maybe it would be good time to enforce the registrations.
Right. I mean, if this was a Prism issue, then yeah, it sounds like we should have them fix the issue. I don't know if anyone from Prism is here. Let's see.
Terrence said he wasn't able to make it, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah, that's okay. We can follow up offline, but yeah, I mean, definitely the bug should just be fixed in the client. And then, yeah, it is definitely an interesting question about how to handle in the meantime, but it sounds like there's a patch to just ignore it anyway. And we just assume that the validator wants 30 million gas.
What's the point of allowing them to set different limits?
Well, this is something that the protocol supported since like the beginning. And like at various times we've gone back and forth around like, okay, should this still be configurable? Like I think the rationale in the early days was like, oh, if we get to like 15 mil and like, you know, suddenly that opens up some DOS vector, then allegedly the miner community get together and like try to change this gas limit in like a more sort of decentralized online way. So there's at least a reason that it's configurable in the first place. There's actually even an EIP at one point to basically hard code it to 30 mil and just take this parameter away from anyone. So you could imagine going either way. And I think while it's a configurable parameter, it's very important that validators retain control, because otherwise we're going to hand like a small number of builders this number and their interests are like not necessarily as aligned as the validators are. So I think it's important to provide the facility as long as it is configurable. And yeah, I mean, it's just unfortunate that there's a bug, but it kind of suggests that we can probably think about better testing for these things. So that's something I can circle back around to Terrence or someone on the Prism team and the other CLs as well, and see what we can do there.
But I guess I'm still not seeing the collusion vector from the builders. Like, assuming they want to lower the base fee by underfilling blocks, giving the proposers ability to control the max gas doesn't prevent that collusion, right? Like the builders can all still say, okay, we're only going to fill blocks to 10 mil to lower the base fee. And that's
It's
still
not really about the base fee. It's more if the gas limit is like, you know, if we want it to be max 30, they could collude to make it max 60, and then suddenly the blocks are too big for people to process.
Not only that, you could imagine that they would like to increase the max gas, so base fee is lower. The lower the base fee, the better it is, the more money to be had all around. And as somebody who was in the eye of the storm in a lot of the gas discussions, the eventual takeaway from most core devs was, let's continue, let the community and the ecosystem decide on that. We always have the nuke option of like, okay, we hard-coded, limited into the protocol. Having that already like at the hands of the core devs means that nobody would probably take advantage of it, because if they would, it would be undone anyway. And so leaving it to the validators, and back in the day to the miners, to decide how big is too big for them or how big is not too big for them to process. They would like to make it as big as possible, but not to increase the state by too much, blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of like where things stand, with an equilibrium that core devs could always hard code it if needed. And that ability by itself removes most of the attack vectors.
is it not set to 30 million now? Like you can't put a 60 million.
It is not. You could change it, and it changes by increment of up to, I think, 0.1% per block. So if you're a major validator and you have a lot of stake, or nowadays, if you're a builder and you're willing to pay to win the block and for the blocks to do what you want, then you could increase it over time by 0.1 increments, 0.1% increments.
Yeah, so there's like many security reasons why it's important to like have this and have it be respected. And again, I'm almost certain at least the Flashbots relay software will verify this limit, like it gets the preference, and then it makes sure that, you know, it matches. So it's something that should be done. And then if builders are like ignoring it, if anything, they should at least get the signal that like the relay endpoint fails when they go to submit a block, and you know, there's a mismatch for some reason. Okay. Yeah, thanks for those updates. And yeah, this was actually an interesting one. It sounds like this is something we should look into a bit more, just to harden this registration flow. So let's see here. 30 minutes left in the call. Or no, when is this going to? It's going to 11. Plenty of time. Sure, so let me call this out. This is, I'll just put this in the chat. So there's like a draft here of this proposal. The proposal is essentially refactoring out this bit to validate payloads. When a builder goes to submit a block to a relay, you know, generally they make sure it's valid either synchronously or asynchronously. And right now, at least with the Flashbot software, there's like a fork of Geth that they use, and it would be nice to have more client diversity here. And so one way to do this is to have an RPC endpoint that we add into all of the various clients to just actually validate the payload. And yeah, so essentially I put together a little proposal for like how this could look. One thing here that we came to was I essentially only bothered with supporting this payment style of end of block transaction. So like the idea is that the builder attaches a transaction at the very end of the block that does the payments. And I think there's some more general payment schemes we want to support, like for example, using Coinbase to pay the proposer. So that might change some of this, but I did want to call this out. It ultimately will require support from the execution clients. So, you know, we're kind of blocked on that process and it could take some time, but I guess I'll just call this out, take a look if you're interested. And from there, it'll just be working with the ELs to get this supported. from conversations so far, people generally, at least, you know, the high level idea they think makes sense with like this validate payload endpoints. And then from there, you know, we just have to figure out how to make the rest of the payment parts work. Yeah. So if there's any questions, I could take them now. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next thing.
So is the goal here that for relays to have different EL implementations they can use for validating blocks coming in from the builders, or is the goal for there to be different builder implementations? For example, the work that you're doing on the RETH implementation for a builder.
Yeah, the first one. So this is just about this part of the relay stack. So right now, and yeah, I'm not sure how I guess Dreamboat does this, but with the Flashbot software today, when they get a block, they basically have like the builder software that you run in, it's like dry run, or there's some like validation mode that you run that software in, and then that then does all of the payload validation. But this is just a fork of Geth, and it's like a little funny because we like put a lot of energy and effort into client diversity, both at the CL and EL layers. And then now with mev-boost today, you know, it's what 98% of blocks are coming through this like one software stack. That kind of makes that pointless. So I think this is very important as like sort of a values thing. And yeah, so the more that we can push this effort forward, I think would be really valuable. Chris, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I think this is super valuable effort. The less custom modifications we need, the better, the more standardized APIs and client diversity we can achieve, the better. Block validation is a big one. Would be nice to switch away from any custom patches. Related to this is also work on using the new block submission APIs of the CL clients. So sorry for like switching a little bit, but relays needed custom CL clients that were like patched with custom code that validate blocks before they're getting broadcast and do an equivocation check also. So supported were Lighthouse and Prism that needed these custom patches that when the relay sends the block for propagation, it does some double checking. The CL clients now implemented a standard API. This means we wouldn't need any custom patches anymore. We can confirm that this generally works with Prism and Lighthouse, and the Flashbot's really main branch is already switched to the new APIs. So just a heads up here, you cannot use the main branch of the Flashbot's relay with the old patched CL clients. So you should also update your CL clients. It's not yet production tested, so use at your own risk. But on the testnets, this seems to be all good. Lucas?
Yeah, so like for that, I've implemented that on Dreamboat 2 weeks ago. So there are another endpoints that are called V2, and like in the alignment of those particular standards, I haven't seen that it's actually ready in both Prism and Lighthouse, and the documentation states actually otherwise. But the problem is that like SSD and other pieces of that software are not yet supported. So I wouldn't be so sure that it's actually 100% ready to be using. We are using the mixture, like we are publishing two different versions of Prism and Lighthouse. So if I don't remember for which one, but for some you still need to use, it's probably Prism that you still need to use the V1, so the old way of block submission process. And on the Lighthouse, you may safely use the V2 process. However, Lighthouse is starting to return some different warnings that it wasn't returned before that would cause your relays to actually return some warnings. So keep that in mind if you plan to use that. I've seen that after the version that is stabilized and after the version that released that. There are some changes being made in both Lighthouse and Prism for this particular changes. I wouldn't be so sure that we should be using that. I would give it some time to actually use it at production. We've tested that, and like one of those, it's not yet ready to use, definitely. But it's a very nice addition, and like I'm totally up for using the V2, especially that it allows you to publish directly by using SSD, so you don't need to do the JSON marshalling at all. You can just supply, like eventually you would be able to just supply the SSD format directly to the beacon node on the publish. Also, like if you haven't seen that, it has few different kind of deepness in the tests. So you can either do some like pre-flight check for blocks, and if you're interested in some more checks, there is another level of security there. And like I think we all need to run the deepest one, which is an equivocation check, attack checks for those particular blocks. Cool. Yeah, that's all. Thanks.
Okay, cool. This is super important input. Thanks for sharing. Maybe we can follow this up. Maybe you can write up, put this into like an issue on Dreamboard or mev-boost or somewhere. Then we might be able to work on this together.
Yeah, sure. Definitely. I'm just saying that like I see the PRs, and so that like Prism is still working on that. So that's why I'm saying that maybe it would be better to wait like a week or so to see
understood. Okay,
finished. Cool.
Thanks for commenting. That's super valuable information.
Just chiming in here to say we value diversity in the code base of the CL client and the EL client, and it's a good opportunity for us to begin to value diversity in the relay software itself.
Yeah, definitely. And this is why I started with this, the doc that I dropped for the EL, because I kind of had seen some of these efforts at the CL. So I think this might take care of everything we want at the CL with this publish endpoint and these different broadcast modes. But yeah, so something, I mean, yeah, I guess it doesn't, I was thinking if it would be like worthwhile to like, you know, if we need to like somehow synchronize the rollout of this. And I suppose it doesn't really matter, but definitely for security, I think you'll find that it's better to have these additional checks. So if you are operating a relay, definitely be following this. And once there's, you know, well-tested cross-client support, definitely you're going to want to be using this, the V2 endpoint. So that's one thing. Let's see. Okay. Another thing I had on here was another proposal, and I think some of you have seen this already. Essentially, the idea is moving the validator proposals, or sorry, the validator registrations on chain in some way. And I think the thing for here, so some of this is the design, I think is a little bit early. There's like some feedback I got in other channels that I still need to update here. I guess one question is just like, does anyone feel this is like high priority or like that valuable? I do think like ultimately there are benefits in the long run. Part of this is understanding if we want to coordinate as a group to like have this ready for Deneb. If not a big deal. But if we do, then that kind of puts us down a quite different path. So yeah, I don't know if anyone has had a chance. I guess I'll just like summarize briefly the idea. So the idea is today, when you make validator registrations, I think they're even made in the CL, then they're like sent every epoch or every 2 epochs quite frequently. And they're just sent as like ephemeral messages to the different relays via HTTP APIs. And that works. This would say instead, rather than use this sort of like off-chain transport, we put them on chain, perhaps even using the blob space with 444 coming up in this fork. And yeah, I mean, a big thing here is like, it's nice to have the consensus really on who has which registration at which time. Because right now there's no global view. And so it can lead to weird situations, especially with like staking pools where you can try to play tricks as a validator. And if there's like some huge MEV block, then you could try to steal the opportunity yourself and just sort of quote run with the money. And making this, you know, having a synchronized global view by putting them on chain, you then can like start to implement different accountability schemes, which I think is pretty important. You know, down the line, well, yeah, I'll just leave it there. Again, that being said, I just kind of wanted to get a temperature check here. If this is something where we're like, oh yeah, we should like definitely do this ASAP, then, you know, that kind of implies doing it all work quickly. And just after some of the more recent updates on the hard fork timing, you know, I'm not sure we have time to also squeeze this in, but yeah, I was just curious to hear anyone's thoughts. Yeah, Chris, do you want to say something?
Yeah, what is the motivation for doing this, you know, as part of the hard fork, right? So Deneb will, you know, enable doing this, but why would relays need, why would relay work need to be tied to that? Like we can let the hard fork happen and all the relays can do all the lift that they have to do in order to have a successful, smooth hard fork for Deneb. And then after that, that capability now exists so that we could sort of design this well in a more sort of calm environment, because we're not sort of a little bit panicked about the hard fork and then roll that out afterwards.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great point. My only like very small counterpoint that I don't even really believe at this point is just urgency is good for driving things. But I totally hear you. And yeah, I think like the rest of us here today, like we don't want a bunch of more rush work that we have to do. So yeah, I don't think at this point it's going to make sense to try to like drive for any like hard fork timeline, and we don't really need to. The only like real consideration is, you know, you could even imagine a regime where like relays are taking both methods, like they're taking the existing registrations and that flow, and then you could also somehow look for more recent registrations, and then you need some like conflict resolution, and there's a question of like, you know, if I look in the wrong place for a validator, like what happens? But yeah, that being said, those are all things we can work through. And yeah, I think at this point then, this is an idea. If it sounds interesting to you and you have any feedback, let's chat. One thing, if we don't like have to rush to ship it with the hard fork, is we can actually sort of quote test on mainnet, which is actually nice. It's just more convenient. So that's like another small thing in that direction. I have one thing here. So during ECC, some of us were there, and I think we had a lot of like really nice conversations. One of them was actually some chats with builders I had, and they like were very keen on this idea that I think we discussed here in the past as well, around having essentially some kind of WebSocket support or like some streaming notion for the bids. Right now, the relays are like, maybe we won't use the word DOSed, but they have like a huge load of like you know, calls for the bid in every slot, because validators want this, but also I believe builders use it to bid strategically. You can imagine you essentially have like a stream that anyone can subscribe to. That's essentially here's the top bid, and then you don't have to like have everyone constantly hitting these endpoints. Yeah, I guess the question for the crowd is, do we think this is worthwhile? If so, I can make a pass at, again, some sort of proposal, and then we can kind of iterate from there. Does anyone feel it's a problem with the current regime? I guess that's a good starting point.
I mean,
in terms of load on the relays.
Yeah, I think load on the relays is a concern. I think it's a manageable concern, but it's infrastructure mostly. Like imagine 700,000 validators always keep the WebSocket connection open, where most of them don't need it at all, like only one at a particular point in time. If you would want to make it so only the proposer connects with WebSocket beforehand, then this would require a builder spec change and a CL change to tell mev-boost, soon is your turn, and start connecting. So this is something to consider. I think it sounds pretty wasteful to have all proposers connect. So like a smart solution here would probably also include some CL changes, just roughing out the scope here. It
Wait, Chris,
would probably
I thought the point was like the validator end stays the same. They still call get header, once using mev-boost, but it's more that the builders would consume the WebSocket like stream. So there may only be like 20 builders that need to be hooked up to the stream, and then the proposers still only call get header the one time.
Well, but do they only call it once? I mean, at least in general, like validators could call multiple times. And so, I mean,
But do they?
So there's some, well, I don't know if they do today, but like they very easily could. Because you can imagine
I
it's
think
like,
we're conflating.
Well, there's two things here. Like you guys, there's just two different concerns. And so, yeah, we could do it either way. We could say, hey, this is an endpoint just for builders. I mean, one concern here in the past was like, essentially like transparency of this endpoint. So like, if we said, oh, as a relay, only builders can connect, then it's like, okay, does that lead to weird changes to market structure, or like have some like information differential that builders have that everyone else does not have? And then even if it's like, oh, if the builders have this, but then also maybe the single proposer, like you may be in the same situation. And then, yeah, I agree with Chris that we shouldn't just have like, a million validators just like taking up these resources. But you could do something where it's in the middle, where you say, okay, maybe like the proposer schedule that the relay has, you allow, say, those 64 validators to connect. And there's some like rolling window. Yeah, so
I mean, isn't there like two?
There's some design space here.
There are like two separate problems, right? One, do we make changes that allow us to differentiate between someone who should be able to get this data or someone who's just doing it for some kind of advantage, like a builder spamming us on get payload? Get header. And it would require a pretty interesting change, like the ability to verify or sign somehow in order to differentiate between the two. So that's like a big change, right? In order to, adding WebSocket, if adding a WebSocket to receive the get header data, if that improves the performance of get header data, because you already have a connection and you don't need to go through the full HTTP handshake, that's going to improve the performance of that. And then anybody that wants to operate efficiently in the ecosystem, including validators, is going to use that, like I would as a validator, because I'm going to get faster payloads. Headers. And so it seems natural then that everyone would start to use the WebSockets, because it's more efficient to, faster, lower latency to get the data. And speaking from our experience at Block Native, where we run a very large number of WebSockets using our mempool API and mempool Explorer, that is a much, much more difficult problem to manage in terms of DOS protection and just overall infrastructure management, because it's stateful connections versus just HTTP. So yes, HTTP is not as efficient, but it's much easier. The worst case scenario is sort of easier to manage than the worst case scenario with WebSockets.
Yeah, it's a good point. But I do feel like at some point a relay will offer this, and if it is better for the user, then it will end up with this almost centralizing vector where people will use that relay over others, and then in the end, all relays will kind of ultimately have to support this feature. But yeah, definitely something to keep in mind to
one more point I want to bring up here. I think as a super interesting topic, thanks for bringing this up too. We should separate this into two use cases for the proposer and for the builders. What I do know is that relays are already collaborating with builders to improve their latencies and to provide more performant submission methods. This include like OpenTCP connections, this includes gRPC, this includes SSC and gzip submissions, also through OpenTCP sockets possibly, that could lead to significant or like some performance improvements. And so some of this effort is already happening anyway. I think maybe a question here is, do we as a really community want to standardize and work together on what APIs and mechanics to provide to builders? Or do we just try out different things and see if they converge?
Yeah, it's an important question. I mean, I think to the extent that we have power as a community here, we can bias towards things that we think are good, if we can all agree on what that means. But yeah, otherwise, definitely we want to support experimentation. So yeah, I mean, this is kind of the point of the builder specs and the relay specs, and that's also a good sort of jumping off point for discussing these things. Yeah, I don't know if there are any other views on the call. Perhaps not right now. Let's see. There was one more thing I have been wondering, and perhaps I'll use this time to at least revisit the topic. During the time of the low carb crusader attacks, I think in various channels, some of us have discussed basically changing the builder API so that the proposer actually never gets the block. And it's now a responsibility of the relay to disseminate the full signed block. And that kind of just clearly eliminates these like unbundling possibilities. I don't know if anyone, yeah, I'll open it there. Does anyone feel strongly either way about this? There's like the one side where, yeah, you would just like eliminate unbundling. The other side of the coin is that it's very much putting like essentially the entire like block flow of the whole network in the hands of, again, like what, 7 actors, which feels weird. And again, like takes autonomy away from the validator, even if only marginally. But yeah, I think it's an idea worth exploring. Right, there's a question in the chat, like, do relays want more responsibility? And that's like another consideration here as well, is that, yeah, you kind of have even more to do, and there might even be more pressure on you to not mess up, and the consequences could be even greater. So something to ponder.
It's worth mentioning that we already have a 1 second delay in there. So like functionally, if the proposer calls get payload past like t equals 2.5 or t equals 3, like the relay still is the sole entity able to get that block published on time, you know, because with the 1 second delay and then the payload being sent to the proposer and then the proposer gossiping it, if they're late at all, they're gonna get reorged out, you know. So it kind of already feels like the relay has that responsibility. It's also worth mentioning that the low carb crusader is like reloading. Like they're deploying new validators, so
right,
there's a
and
chance.
yeah, wait, sorry, the 1 second delay, you mean in between, like if I call get payload, it waits 1 second before serving the response? So
it goes through all the checks, and then it tries to publish the block through the beacon node. If that works, then it waits 1 full second before sending the block back to the, at least that's what we implemented in the Flashbots relay pro. Yeah.
I think everyone done exactly the same. However, that's pretty bold assumption about a gossip layer performance and ability to actually transmit this block over the network. And as we were talking with Prism and other consensus layer clients, it's not that easy. And like this 1 second is a fairly random number. So it may not be enough at some point. So as much as I am not sure that we should go in that path right now, that we should all just publish blocks and never return that to the proposer. I'm also not sure that 1 second is a good idea for that particular one on the very long run.
Yeah, I think the 1 second was more of like a sort of hot fix, like let's make sure that this isn't going to be a disaster while the attack was ongoing. And yeah, it could be the case that the number could be tuned for sure. Yeah, so okay, I mean, it doesn't sound like there's super strong consensus that we need to change this API today. And perhaps we'll just keep an eye on these different latencies. I mean, one thing we can say about the 1 second is that it seems to be working, right? Because that's what I think most of the relays, if not all of them, run. And you know, the system works. Yeah.
Hey,
Is there
Alex.
any opinion from the Ethereum Foundation on this? Because it just seems pretty dramatic to say that we're just going to give up entirely on decentralization of block proposal, and we're just going to go full on centralization to the relay community. It seems a rather
well. I don't
dramatic
think that's
step to
what
wrap my head around.
that's what this is signaling. So you can still, as a validator, always build locally. I think this is like the argument would be, okay, given almost regardless of adoption, although you know the adoption of mev-boost does motivate sort of the gravity of the security concerns, but given the security of the system just on its own, you know, this could make it more secure. Yeah, I don't know if we're going to get like a EF official statement, just because there are many different views at the EF. I do, like, personally, I do think it feels very wrong to me to take this degree of freedom away from the validators. So like when I first heard the idea, I was like, no, like that's not probably the right direction. But it does really cleanly solve the unbundling attack. And to the extent that we also want mev-boost to have integrity so that, you know, this PBS construction is like used and like trusted, then that could be an argument for this change. Yeah.
Here's my view. Fundamentally, from the POV, by the way, Matt from Block Interviewer, POV from the perspective of the validator is they really want the relay network to operate like a utility. They don't really care where the oil comes out of the ground, how it gets moved across an ocean, which, you know, refining plant it goes to, how the electricity gets to the house. Like all they want to do is turn on the lights and have lights go on. And we as relay operators are increasingly incentivized to operate as a utility where we back each other up and things like that. And so this is really a question of, do we put another task on the relay utility in the interest of increasing security? And I understand some of the philosophical things here, but let's be honest. Again, this is one of these things, right? I keep talking about this, which is the relays already do much of the heavy lifting. And another piece of heavy lifting doesn't really change the state of affairs from an external perspective. And two, like at the end of the day, the relays doing their job is critical to the orderly operation of the network. And that's going to be true for the foreseeable future. I think one of the other questions about this is, does it further enshrine the relays? And my comment is the relays are already pretty damn enshrined. So, you know, once if we were to view the relay network as a utility that needs to operate as a utility, I think this is a very fair question. But insofar as we try to play it both ways like we are right now, it feels very uncomfortable. So, you know, my view is anything we can do to secure the network and make it more reliable is a really good thing, as long as it's something that people opt into, which is what's happening right now. So anyways, food for thought.
Yeah, thanks for adding that perspective.
Wait, Matt, what do you mean by playing it both ways right now?
That we treat the relays as individuals that are quote unquote competing with each other, but there's no economic, you guys know this from me, and that we back each other up, right? That really what the network wants, what the validators want is a monolithic service that they just address. Now, maybe they opt into certain parts of it because they care about these values and those values. But at the end of the day, there's this fundamental disparity between having it both ways is how the how the network views the relays and how the network wants to interface with the relays. When by network, I mean the validators. Again, this is where miss-slot insurance, or when we have to reimburse for miss-slots and things like that. Like, do your job, and if you don't do your job, pay us back, right? And how we, as the relay operators, the small set of actors that carry the network on our shoulders, quite literally, right, view ourselves. And I think, and again, I don't want to derail this conversation, but that at least a majority of the current relays recognize that this is we have more in common than we have in opposition to each other. And the point of competition is kind of pointless, because what are we competing for but a leaderboard on Relay Scan, which is easily gamed. So my view is we should acknowledge the utility nature of what we do. We should acknowledge that we are all contributing to a consistent service, and we should approach it as such. And anyways, it's my POV. Having talked to a lot of validators, having talked to a lot of relay operators, having spent a lot of time in these conversations at ECC, and we want to encourage, again, more participation. We want to encourage more diversity. We want more members of our supply chain, not fewer. So anyways, I'll stop. Does that answer your question, Uri?
It does. Thanks. I was kind of like, I wasn't sure. And I agree with you for the record, but yes. Also, on the previous point about the get header, and that, like, it seems to be also relevant there to the previous topic that we discussed about, okay, the burden of, being hammered by all the builders, and we're kind of, well, let's open it up for everybody because we want to allow for transparency, etc. But kind of like everything else, burden falls on us. And we're like, okay, fine, we want transparency as a service provider. Let's make the service or monolithic service, and let's make it available for everybody so everybody could see. But yes, there's still this mismatch on. So generally agree with you.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for those perspectives. That does, I think, probably tee us up for this next point, because I know Tina's here. I think she wanted to say some words. Chris or Tina, do you guys want to chime in?
Hello, friends.
Hello. Hello.
Can you guys hear me?
I can.
Loud and clear.
Amazing. Awesome. Welcome back, Stokes. We've dearly missed you. Well, in the past couple weeks, I know there's a lot of actual movement on the R&D front, so which is super exciting. At the same time, since our last mev-boost community call and our gathering in Paris, where I basically pushed forward quite a bit and have communicated with many in this current call about the next steps on PBS Guild or PBS Fund or PBS Foundation. There are many names floating around. And I think it's at a stage where we have a clear timeline and a next step. So happy to share a little bit with everyone. I also, I may have just also posted this V3 of the proposal for PBS Guild on the collective.flashbots.net, but I'm happy to share the link. Hopefully this time is public. And feel free to comment. I tried my best to incorporate, I think there was like 50 to 70 comments across the page. So for, oh no, forum setting, my apologies. Yeah, that will get fixed. But high level TLDR, sorry if I'm repeating myself a little bit for those who may have less context on this. So basically, I think when we speak about relay economic viability, and we know this is an urgent problem. At the same time, it's a very, very hard problem to solve. in a sustainable way. And the irony is sustainability is in the name of the problem that we're trying to solve. And so while in Paris, I think I have felt the need, and having met everyone, I truly have felt that there's something that we gotta be able to do to move things forward. But what is it that doesn't basically put us into rushing into a position that we will regret, or essentially that could have irreversible consequences for our ecosystem. So in reaction, basically in the past 2 weeks, I think there's a lot of excitement and momentum that gather around the community about wanting to contribute to help out, whether it's the relays or the solving the relay economic sustainability problems, or the harder trade-off space in along the design space of PBS R&D. So basically, PBS Guild is this vehicle that's a grants program. It should start out simple and lightweight, and start out with a minimum of $1 million in grants funding as a threshold to kick it off, and have 50% of the initial funding that can be set aside to ensure the independent relays, as well as research and data relays that can actually help us understand and be more accountable to the ecosystem as a whole. So that is that part, I would say, is almost there. From legal setup, to also in terms of like securing the funding, I would say we're probably 1.5 weeks away. And the other side, the other half of the initial funding for this grants giving vehicle is set aside for some of the backlog but thorny issues that we probably want to essentially incentivize the researchers who have more time and bandwidth on their hands to tackle. So in the proposal, I have updated a new list based on the previous 2 weeks feedback that I've collected from folks within the community who have seen and commented on the proposal as a suggested list of research grant directions. And all in all, putting everything together, I want to say that I feel like I can finally take a deep breath and actually say that I think at least for the next half year, I think we will be able to support at least 5 relays within the ecosystem. And that hopefully can get us more time, and also just more mind share to think about how to actually solve it and hack on some solutions together. Yeah, I think that's it. If you would like to, if you're interested in any of the more boring operational details on how this is going to be set up, I'm very happy to share to the best of my knowledge in terms of how this vehicle could work, and also clarify questions I think I have received also in the past 2 weeks as well. But it's also explained in the latest proposal in terms of how to structure and how we think about governance and what is Flashbot's role in this. But happy to answer any questions or share any of the points. I thought I wanted to be blunt and say the most important things is that I think timeline-wise, end of this month would be a good starting point. And I think it's likely that we can aim for the grants to be ready to deploy by the 1-year anniversary of the merge. There's a lot of work to do, so let's go. Yeah.
Just briefly looking into it, we're talking about up to 5 relays which are not integrated with any builder or relay. I assume it's not integrated with any builder or searcher. And when you say advancing infrastructure resiliency and neutrality, are we talking about like, okay, OFAC transaction censorship, get the book, like we're not in there anyway because we run a block builder. But are this limited still to only those who do not censor OFAC transaction?
So I think this is a really, really good and important point. I definitely agree with, I think there's some comments and feedback from the previous version that we do not want to politicize unnecessarily. I think there's a lot of problems to solve, and I think we're all in it together. Credible neutrality entails us not coercing each other to make decisions that they're not comfortable with. And we as an ecosystem can only do our best to diversify geographically, as well as incentivize people who have different interpretations. That said, I think that this is something that's not a hard line, but it will be a strong discretion in the sense of like, it will be very difficult to actually, this is a public goods funding and decentralization. While we're all working towards decentralization, we should also do our best operationally to maintain the decentralization of Ethereum. I think when we put out a grant, there is a mission there. So if we can choose the ones, the relays who are genuinely and naturally in the position to do so, I think it will be really for the best. If we have, I don't know if everyone here has checked the recent OFAC kind of dashboards. It's not looking very good. So yeah, so I think there's something that, like from my personal perspective, as well as from Flashbots, we're doing our best to dispel misinformation. And I think that especially the recent inclusion list proposal, and we should really make sure that it can have the resource and mindshare to focus on it, as well as we should involve some of the people within the policy scene to help explain and help us get out of this current quagmire soon. Yeah.
Cool. Very exciting. Thank you for all the work you put in this, Tina. The proposal is like pretty long, so I don't know, like people will probably want some time to digest. But yeah, very exciting to see this and to take the next step forward.
Yeah, so related to this, well, I guess it's not directly related, but I thought the timing will be really nice. As SBC is coming up, one of the reasons I really wanted to hopefully get the everything set up before SBC MEV workshop is also to be able to, I know some of you may plan on going there, and also there are quite a few pretty plugged in academia friends who will be also speaking at a MEV workshop there. So I think it would be really good to either do like a research-a-thon where we actually this time have something more practical. Like I think Terrence has some idea in terms of wanting to move forward, accelerate the progress the prototyping. And I think there's a couple problems that we also identified. And also, I think maybe we can do a workshop on the trade-offs of the various essentially CR designs. So I don't know if this is something that anyone's of interest, and I think this can be a good opportunity, and we can basically refine further what problem we actually really need to solve and who can actually commit to solving it, like form the core, be the champion of these particular problems that may be more or less on the backlog of the main researchers from the EF. Yeah.
I'll be at SBC and looking forward to having that conversation. That's for sure.
Yes, yes. Data transparency is another dimension. I have a ton to chat with you, Matt, and anyone who's interested on that, because that's another dimension of PBS Guild's, I think, principle or pillar. So that, and on that front, there's actually some groundwork I'm starting to do, communicating with the best data scientists that I can find who's deep in the PBS land, to unfog the map, to map out, I would say, an extended order flow supply map, and also to hone in on some, and also to solve some of the data sharing problem. And data, essentially, public goods data relay is one of the things that I recently added on the latest version of the PBS Guild proposal. So happy to also move that initiative forward, but there's too much going on that proposal. So please comment or just leave a message. Happy to follow up, and ping me on Telegram if you're interested to do a researchathon or a workshop on any of the topic I mentioned, or something that you want to bring up.
Cool. Yeah, I'll be at SBC. So looking forward to see you all there. And yeah, if anyone is around and wants to join us, reach out.
Tina, can I just going briefly over that? What's the high level TLDR vehicle of this? Who decides who gets the funding? Like,
Great question.
Who's in charge of where the money goes?
Yeah, so high level setup, it's a Cayman memberless foundation. That's like essentially the legal setup. We did basically a bunch of research, and just luckily, I think this is the playbook that Protocol Guild also have explored quite far. So it become quite easy for, and also I'm relatively familiar with the setup. And in fact, it's really friendly for DAOs, as well as has flexibility. So what you see on paper basically is like there will be a non-executive independent director who's probably going to be a good accountant. Hopefully they can count the money correctly, as in addition to operating a multi-sig. And then there are two paths in terms of best practice when it comes to these foundation setup. Is one is a council based, which is a committee of some sort, and the other is to delegate it to quote unquote a community of decision makers. So this latter is very friendly for DAOs, and the former is more suitable for something that is still highly uncertain and exploratory, and kind of needs to put in the early work, which is the path that we're most likely to take. So it's actually quite convenient because we need a grants committee anyways, so the council can be the grants council. And so how I'm taking the current approach is like a phased approach. So starting when we announce, hopefully we make the timeline of September 14th. That'll be a good memorable day. And going forward for 6 months, that will be the pilot phase. And during this pilot phase, I think that we want to have 3 to 5 grants reviewers, basically, who sit on the council. I think what you see in the proposal is clearly not very fleshed out in terms of the hard criterion. And I think it's also not in my place to actually set in, like I would say, excruciating detail on how the grants should be done. So I think one of the first things that grants committee need to do is to actually flesh it out and or reduce or adjust it as needed. And then I think at this current stage, I kind of in my latest proposal provide an explanation because there's a lot of discussion around PBS Guild versus PBS Fund. But in my mind, ideally, if we can move towards a guild, but that guild, the first step is to actually figure out who else from Stokes and Neuter are doing the work on PBS, right? So I would say this is the first step. In fact, mapping out the key research areas, we should be able to know within the ecosystem who is doing what work on it. And I think so the first pilot phase is to find the high priority ones. The high priority problems may not be the highest priority on the ePBS roadmap, but it may be something that's more ecosystem oriented, because that's the whole point, is to have an ecosystem grants vehicle. So that's, I think, the gist of it. And I think we should evaluate at the end of 6 months. And in terms of whether to scale up or down the effort, and we can go from there. And during the whole time, I think the funding, just like Protocol Guild, can continue to stream in. And I think we will just keep a door open and see how it goes. But yeah.
Thanks, appreciate that.
Anytime.
Cool. I think that might be a good stopping point. We have a few minutes. If anyone has any other questions or any other things they'd like to discuss. But otherwise, thank you again, Tina. And yeah, I think we're all excited to move forward and figure out, how to make this work.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Okay. Yeah, then I'll call that. Thanks, everyone.